Sarah asked the question about how do you deal with victim behavior in a 5-year-old. And so I asked her to give me an example of a specific victim behavior. And she said, tonight at dinner, she sat for a good long time, about 10 minutes, saying that she didn't want to eat any dinner. You will waste your whole life if you think you can make people do things, even a 5-year-old. It turns into a contest, turns into a struggle, a war. It's like kids have a little meter in their head, no kidding, like a little detector that senses any violation of their right to choose, the law of choice. So when you tell them what to do, it's like that little sensor fires off, and they will now fight you to the death. And we've kind of shown the importance of that in our own lives, haven't we? I mean, wars, many of them have been fought in this world, where millions have died for one principle, freedom. So freedom is apparently very important, and it's important to a 5-year-old. Now, is it important that a 5-year-old eat? Well, eventually. But why make her eat then? Why bother? I mean, waste of time. So what you do is you say, oh, well, sweetie, you don't have to eat. But if you don't eat now, and you set a time by which they have to finish eating. So let's say that you start eating at 6 o'clock, and she says, I don't want to eat. And you just kind of generally notice, I mean, you kind of notice when the family gets done eating. I don't know how, I come from a family of food inhalers. So, you know, eating an entire Thanksgiving meal takes, 4 minutes. So in your family, it may take longer. You might want to, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and tell little, whatever, we'll call her the victim queen, tell the little victim queen that she has until 20 minutes after. You start at 6 o'clock, and you say she has 20 minutes after to finish, and you don't care whether she eats or not. No problemo. But if she doesn't eat whatever is in front of her by 6:20, there is no more food. She doesn't snack afterward. She doesn't come to the fridge later. She doesn't come later and say, oh, I'm hungry. Because if she does, you tell her this ahead of time. You're going to say, oh, you're hungry. Well, that's kind of predictable, isn't it? I knew you were going to be hungry because this is what happens when we don't eat dinner. So the next time that we eat supper and the dinner's available to you, you'll probably be more motivated to finish your dinner. You're done. You don't be irritated. You don't be disappointed. Nothing. You let natural consequences teach. The natural consequence of not eating dinner is what? Irritation, being controlled, being told to sit at the table. That's not a natural consequence. Are you kidding? The natural consequence is hunger. So let her go to bed hungry. She could go without food for days with no significant physical consequences. So missing supper, that's nothing. And you watch, she'll start eating your dinner. She really will. And if that doesn't answer your question, keep asking questions about it. Another viewer says, if you have been deeply hurt by someone in many ways, how long does it take to get over it and finally quit thinking about them, especially the anger and resentment? The more information you provide, the more specific I can be, but this is enough to get started. If someone has hurt you, there are two processes that go that will help you to accept them and learn to actually love them. The first is an intellectual understanding, and the second is not. The first is understanding that we live in a world where the only possible way that I have to learn to be loving, the only way I can learn, is by making mistakes. They are unavoidable. Absolutely unavoidable. We've got to get that in our heads. You can't learn to do any task on this planet without making mistakes. Out in our backyard, we have pipes going all over the house, underground and in outbuildings, and I used to do it all. And as I got older, I started having my boys do it. And I would describe it to them, and they would go out and do it. And I knew for a fact that sometimes that they would weld the PVC together wrong. Well, so what? Then you cut it out and you do it again. You learn from making mistakes. The only way I can learn how to be loving is to have moments where I'm not loving. And the only way I can make those mistakes is to make them at the expense of the people who are around me. So whoever it was that hurt you, it is absolutely unavoidable that that person had to inconvenience and even hurt you. That person was drowning in the pool. You were close by and you got splashed. How else could it possibly have been? He or she couldn't possibly have learned about love, or about, in this case, maybe even being unloving, without affecting you. The price we pay for being in a world where we get to make our choices is that other people have to make theirs. And they have to make choices that affect us, and affect us negatively. There just ain't another way. So that's the intellectual process. She had to make them. You got in the way. Second, the only reason that it bothers you that this person made mistakes that affected you is that you didn't feel unconditionally loved already. When we have sufficient unconditional love in our lives, it really is as though we have $20 million with us all the time. Then, when somebody comes along and through thoughtlessness, insensitivity, maybe occasionally even meanness, takes $2 emotional dollars from us, or 20, or 1,000, if we have $20 million, we don't care, because we've got what matters most, which is unconditional love. If we don't have enough unconditional love, which is the case with almost all of us, and we're down to our last $2 and somebody comes along and takes us, we're devastated. It's the end of the world. Your pain, this is critical to get, and I want you to keep asking questions during our time here together if you're not getting this. Your pain is not due to what that person did. Your pain is due to a lifelong lack, a lifelong insufficiency of real love. And all this person did was add one more straw to the camel's back. Do you see that? You are already absolutely burdened with pain. This person came along, and no matter what this person did to you, the details are almost irrelevant. What this person was really saying to you was, I don't love you either. And that was enough just to add one more straw, and you were just destroyed. So once you get that, then you can see that the solution is not changing that person, not even forgiving that person. It's getting enough real love in your life to fill you up, and as you fill up with real love, you will feel healed. And as you heal, you'll not just forgive that person. That's kind of a halfway step. You'll completely accept and even love that person, because you'll see that that person treated you the way that he or she did because he or she was not feeling loved themselves. And you'll be able to see that that person just needs to feel loved by you. So that's how we learn to forgive people. See that, gosh, they were doing their best. They couldn't have done any differently. They affected us incidentally, and we need to feel more loved. So the person that just asked me that question said she married me for conditional love and then wanted to go back out to conditional love with her grown children who live away. She began to flirt with others to the extreme and didn't care if I was present or not. Then she used my anger to justify to my friends that she had to leave the marriage and that nothing I said was true about what she did. So what you just said was brilliant. Your relationship initially was founded on imitation love. How could it have been anything different? Without knowing what real love was, without having enough real love in your own life, how could your relationship have been founded on anything else? Imitation love was all you had. So naturally, the two of you got together based on a relatively equal and abundant exchange of imitation love. That's what falling in love is. Then, predictably, imitation love wears off. It always does. And as imitation love wears off, well, what's going to happen? One or often both partners will look at the other one and say, well, you made me happy before. What's wrong with you now? How come you're not making me happy now? And she's naturally then going to blame you for not making her happy, when the truth is she'd never been happy. She was unhappy long before she met you. But when you gave her enough imitation love in the beginning, she was so sure you were going to make her happy. Then when you didn't, when it wore off, she was bitterly disappointed. And of course, what did she do then? She went out and started looking for additional sources, new sources, fresh sources. Of course she would do that. Once imitation love wears off, that emptiness comes back into our hearts. We got to do something about it. You can't fill it up with an old source of imitation love, so she goes looking for a new one. And you can fill it up with anything. She might have gone looking for a job. That would have been one way to do it. She might have gone using drugs or alcohol or a boyfriend, or, like you said here, used her kids. In the end, it doesn't matter what she uses or used. We'll use anything. I mean, if sticking beans up our nose was pleasurable, we'd go to that. Anything will do when we're in pain. So it's not about you. But then you became angry when she left you and essentially betrayed you. Do you see? Because she was your source of imitation love. And when you got angry, all she could hear you screaming was, I don't love you. So here are the two of you saying, you don't love me, and the other one saying, well, you don't love me either. Well, I want you to love me. I want you to love me. You two were in an impossible situation. And the only thing that can solve it is for one or both of you to find sufficient real love to make a difference in the relationship. Here's a parent saying, what's your opinion on positive consequences? Kind of like dangling a carrot. If you do something, then you get to do something else that the child wants to do, versus negative consequences. If you offer positive consequences, you can call it whatever you want, but we're bribing the child. Children should understand that the baseline condition is you can do anything you want to do. That's how life should be. We should, at our baseline, be every choice in the universe is open to you. And this is what kids need to learn. They need to see all of life as being completely free and open. But as you make dumb choices, doors close. Do you see? All of life should be free and open. That's the natural condition of the universe. It's an abundant, eternal, universal flow. But for example, as I drive too fast, what happens? When the cop pulls me over, I just closed the door. I did. Now I can't get to where I want to go in the time that I wanted to get there. I can't continue driving. I can't continue to have my insurance premiums be what they used to be. Do you see? With our behavior, we close doors. Whereas when we bribe children, when we say, if you do this, I'll give you this, really we're not only buying their affection, but we're teaching them that they have to do certain things for doors to be open. No, they should be taught the doors are open all the time. We're buying them. We're manipulating them. It teaches them a principle that is not good. And notice you said positive versus negative consequences. I don't refer to negative consequences. I refer simply to natural consequences. If you don't finish your food, then the natural consequence is we're going to put your food away. Why is that a natural consequence? Because if you make the decision, I'm speaking to the child now. See, we rescue our children all the time. if you make the decision not to eat your food, why should I have to sit around here while you don't eat it? Why should I have to put off cleaning up the dishes? Why should I have to go out of my way to accommodate your foolish choice? So I'm not going to. At the end of our dinner time, we're picking up all the food, putting it in the fridge, washing the dishes, and we're done, like we usually do. Do you see? And then the kid catches on, oh, this is just how it usually goes. It's not about them. See? They're natural consequences, not positive or negative. When the cop pulls me over, I don't see it as a negative choice. It's just a natural consequence. It's actually a positive consequence for everybody else, isn't it? It gets an irresponsible, reckless driver off the road. Do you see what I'm saying? It's not positive or negative. It's just natural. Jill asks a great question. What do you do after a good amount of telling the truth to your spouse? And he still holds a grudge, and he still continues to be victimized. Are there any other things that I can do? I happen to know her, and so she's been doing this with her husband in real love terms for, you can easily correct me if you want, but it's something like maybe 2 or 3 months without, with the reduced resentment and so on. You're just getting started, kid. I mean, here's a man who has not felt unconditionally loved for his entire life. He doesn't have anybody around him who still loves him unconditionally. Nobody. Then you come along and you change the entire rules of human relationships. You come along and you start telling him the truth. Well, he's still kind of reeling. He's going, what are you doing? This doesn't even make sense to him. Do you see what I'm saying? It's confusing. He's still not even sure what you're doing. He's still not even sure that you're going to stay like this. This isn't just some sort of passing freakish fad. So my suggestion to you is, as you tell the truth about yourself and as you refrain from getting in protecting behaviors, you will be much happier every time. So what's the hurry? You just keep telling him the truth. You just keep loving him. And as you do that, he will either become more and more attracted to the truth, or he'll be more and more repelled by it. And as he does that, one of those two, your choice about what to do next in the relationship will become increasingly obvious. So for now, stick with what I call always the next step, which is get more loved, practice being more loving. Pretty simple. Just keep doing that step over and over again. You'll be really glad you did. It's not complicated. You don't have to worry, what am I going to do in my relationship? No. Get more loved, call people, and then practice being more loving, not just with him, but with other people. And the rewards will be incredible. Just the next step. Here's one writer who says, I'm experiencing grief this holiday season to the death of my brother this year. What is the difference from processing grief due to a big loss in your life and being a victim? Oh, easy. You've lost someone who I can only assume was important in your life, or you wouldn't be grieving. And losing someone important, someone who is either a source of real love or who we, in most cases, I can tell you that the most common source of grief in our lives is not that we lost a source of real love, but that we lost someone that we hoped might someday become a source of real love. Because for most of us in our families, we didn't get real love from our families ever. So either way, it's not really important. Whether you actually got real love from your brother or whether you hoped you would someday, still, it's a loss. And it takes time to get over a loss, but time's not the answer. Real love always is. The more unconditional love you get from other people around you, the less that loss will matter. Again, the $20 million, the $2. If you have $20 million in your life and you lose your brother, that's more than losing $2. That might be $2,000. It might be $20,000. It might be $200,000. But if you have 20 million in your life, it won't knock you on your butt forever. It'll be painful. It will hurt. It will hurt for a while. I can't tell you how long. Only you can know that. But what's the difference between just genuine, pure grief and victimhood? If someone's life is filled with unconditional love and they lose someone close to them, and I watched that happen. I watched that happen this past weekend with a good friend who lost her mother. She's somebody who's been practicing real love for some time. She was thrilled that this person in her life who was sick was able to go to a place where they're not sick. She was grateful for all the time that she'd been able to spend with this person, rather than unhappy for the time that she now wouldn't have for this person. So it was not a devastating event to her. Now, some grieving, sure, but she didn't grieve in a way that was intended to attract the attention and sympathy of other people. That is what a victim does. That's the difference. And only you and those who are close to you would be able to tell the difference. So you'll have to work that out. What do I do when I'm empty and drowning, and I can't get a hold of anybody by phone after many attempts? And how do I not get discouraged when I don't get a return call? I don't take it personally yet. All right, so what can you do? I can tell you from the experience of working with hundreds of people who do this now, many people have said to me that simply by leaving a message on the phone of somebody who they know will love them is often enough. For example, they call somebody that they know loves them and they say, I'm feeling whatever, out of sorts, grouchy, PMSy, irritate, whatever it is. Pick your word. And I just need somebody to love me. And I know you would have had you been there. So if you get a chance to call me, call me. Simply leaving the message is enough to bring a smile to their face, because they can remember that they're loved. Remember the 5 steps to responding to anger? One of them is remember that you're loved, or actually feel loved. And just by remembering their love, just by making the electronic contact is sometimes enough. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is sit down, and I recommend this. As you have phone conversations with people who love you, I recommend that you actually write down some of the loving things that they say. And if you exchange loving emails with people, I recommend that you write them, or that you print them off. I'm making a note of this because I think it's a good idea. I've actually gone into the homes of people that I have taught over the years, just for social visits. I was just visiting the home of a friend recently, several thousand miles from here, and as I walked into his study, there on his wall were printed up emails from me to him, where I had said something loving to him in an email. And he had printed them up the size of big and put them on his wall. And he said that they were there because in case he couldn't reach somebody, he could look up on the wall, read them, and remember what it felt like when he'd heard them firsthand. So I recommend you do that. Write down what you hear, print out what is sent to you by email. That's one thing. Another is that you sit and either meditate or pray. Hooking into a divine source of love is a huge benefit. So that's an enormously positive thing that you can do. Another thing is to pull out some form of real love literature. As you're reading true principles, now this is a real metaphysical thing, so hang on. As you're reading true principles that are divinely inspired, that are true, that come from a divine source, you'll also feel a connection to the divine source from which they came. Make sense? And you will feel some of that love. So there's a number of things you can do when you can't reach somebody else. Let me know if you need some others. Jill's asking, she was listening to the parenting audiobook, and I talked about not criticizing kids' report cards if they get bad grades. So what do we say to them? In real love, we're not talking about being permissive. We're not talking about looking at report cards where a kid has gotten D's and saying, oh, yippee, I love you very much, because they don't learn anything. Real love is about loving and teaching. So picture this. Kid walks in, kid gets a D, or an F, and the kid hands you the report card, and the kid is sitting there cringing, waiting for the hammer to fall. There's just nothing more delightful and surprising and fun than for this child to not have the hammer fall. And so you look over the report card and you hand it back and you say, so, tell me what you learned. And the child will, of course, then say, learned about what? They never make this easy for you, ever. So you say, from your report card, tell me what you learned. Well, I don't know. That's the next most common response. I noticed you got a B in geometry. How did you like that class? You see, we want to comment on the grades instead of paying attention to what they're learning, instead of teaching them something, which is our job as parents. And so you say, how did you like that class? What did you learn in it? What was the homework like? Did you find it difficult to accomplish the homework? Did you always turn in your homework? The questions that you missed in geometry were usually due to what? What did you learn about that? Was it inattention? Was it something you didn't understand? You're just asking because you're genuinely interested in them. Notice there's no tone of criticism in my voice. There's no, you should have done it differently. No, you're just saying, so what did you get out of that? Then eventually you're talking about each class and you get down to the F class, which was history, whatever. And the child says, I hate history. Oh, this is great. Because, see, now you get to learn why. And so it turns out that instead of you beating up on this kid for doing a lousy job in history, it turns out that for example, this kid's teacher hates him. Or this kid sits next to another kid who bullies him every time he comes in the class. There's something going on with this kid. Kids don't get Fs for no reason. So either there's something going on at school, or just as often, there's something going on at home. And so you find out you hate it. Why? And if you have no trace of judgment in your face, in your eyes, in your voice, nothing, the kid will tell you why he hates the class. And the reason he hates the class is why he's failing the class. You see? Then you address that and see what you can do to help the kid. It's astonishing how much you can improve a kid's grade by helping him with what he's telling you, as opposed to what we usually do, you know, you need to get those grades up. That's so stupid. I mean, like a kid who got an F doesn't know this, you know, that an F is lower than an A. It's like telling a kid he should be taller. We do the dumbest things with our kids. So that's what I suggest you do. Kid gets bad, ask them what's going on. They're dying to tell you, and it's fun to work it out with them instead of belittling them. That's what crushes them. Dan says, so do you think that there is evil in the world, or is all of our misery caused by the lack of real love? Dan, that's way too hard a question, so please exit the room. You're to be punished. That's a great question. I personally prefer not to see evil in the world, and here's why. As soon as I conveniently label something as evil, now I don't have to respond to it. Do you see? I have no responsibility. If I look at somebody who's doing something extraordinarily bad, all I have to say is, oh, he's evil. Well, now what? Now I don't have to do anything. It's just because he's evil. That's why we love our monsters. We actually love Hitler, Stalin, Saddam Hussein, because these people are like kind of like the moral basements for us that we can always live above. They're the people we can always criticize. They're the people for whom we have no responsibility, that we don't ever have to compare ourselves to. I don't believe in evil. I think that there are evil forces, but I don't think there are evil people. I think there are people who I have just seen over and over in my life. I've worked with people in prison. I've worked with drug addicts. I've worked with husbands who have beat their wives. I've worked with men who have sexually abused children. I've worked with people that the system has called absolutely untreatable. And as they have felt unconditionally loved, their whole lives have changed. Now, what does that tell you? To me, it says that real love is the answer. Whereas society looks at those people and says, oh, they're just bad. I don't know I've met any bad people. I've met a lot of empty and afraid and desperate and unloved people, but bad? I don't know. Could be wrong, but I haven't met any. Tina here. Good to see you. I've had so many miracles because of real love. Today I had an opportunity to be a wise person whom I have hated for 32 years. And I felt only love, and I was healed. I mean, is that a hoot or what? She went on to continue. I also spoke to a sister I had not spoken to in 25 years. Does that just tickle your heart to hear that, everybody? We didn't have a good relationship, and it was a totally loving interaction. I'm on chapter 7 of the Victim book, and my life is changing. I just got to tell everybody. I mean, this real love thing isn't just it's not a technique. It's not some clever thing I thought of. I'm not this smart. It's the universal power. No kidding. It's everywhere. And all we have to do is feel it, share it, and it'll change our lives. It's amazing. Here she hasn't spoken to her sister in 25 years and it went well. Somebody she's hated for 32. And without real love, we tend to continue hating those people for the rest of our lives. Everything becomes possible when we love people. It's pretty amazing. I just dig that. Sarah, the mother, is back to the victim queen. If she asks for something like chocolate 10 minutes before dinner, then she goes into a whiny, moany thing. We've all seen this, haven't we? But I want chocolate. So get this. The only reason she does that is because it gets her something. Are you clear? Victims only act like victims because there's a payoff for them. She gets some kind of power over you. It bothers you when she acts like a victim. I mean, when my little teeny kids would go, but I want to, I'd go, I'm sorry, why are you asking this question twice? Did you think I had forgotten the first time you'd asked this question? Did you think I'd become a different person, would give you a different answer? You can have chocolate whenever, sometime after, we'd talk about whenever it was they could have it, but right now, the answer is no. If you'd like, you're perfectly welcome to go into your room and whine and scream and cry, bang your head on the wall, but not on the painted wall, maybe on some wood, that I wouldn't have to repaint, and kick up all the fuss that you like, but you can't do it here because it disturbs the rest of us who are talking. So what would you like to do next? You see how it's no threatening, there's no, oh, gee, I hate it that you're a victim. No, you give them more choices. You don't tell them stop whining. No, that's ridiculous. You can't stop people from anything. Leave them alone. But you say, you can't do it here because we're all talking. Have you noticed that everybody here is behaving like a civilized human being? All of us civilized human beings are having a civil conversation out here, and having somebody come out and scream makes that impossible. In the same way that I wouldn't allow somebody to bring a stereo into the room and play it so loud we couldn't talk, you can't come and scream in the room. So see, you're not picking on them. You're describing simple principles. You can't interrupt other people's conversations. So go scream in the other room, but the chocolate stays in the drawer. So take your pick. And if you say it that matter-of-factly, they'll still try you a couple more times, but then they'll realize, shoot, I can't play mom by acting like a victim anymore. And it kind of ruins their day, but you don't hear the whining. It's stunning. Here's one. It says, we're getting ready to implement family chores. Great idea, by the way. My children used to complain that they were the only ones that worked among all their friends. And they probably were. Their friends didn't have any chores. My kids lived on 13 acres and would go out and run the rototiller and plant gardens and pull weeds and cut down trees, and they did all that. As they got older, they said, dang, Dad, my friends don't know how to work. It's important that kids know how to work, or they grow up being irresponsible and unhappy. That's the point, is that they're unhappy. So we're teaching them to work not for our own convenience. We don't get kids to do jobs for us. This is important. I used to tell mine, I'm not asking you to do the garbage for me. I could do the garbage in less time than it gets me to get you to do it. The idea of doing the garbage is it teaches you to be responsible and strong. Really. So great that you're getting them to do chores. General opinion seems to be that allowances should be related to getting chores done. Again, forgive me, I almost never state anything vacillating, but allowances are what you give a child to live on. So you give a child allowances and you say, use this to buy your, and then you see, allowances are something they learn to be responsible for so they can manage money. So you give them allowance to initially buy their candy when they're really young. Then as they get older, you give them an allowance and you say, okay, now this is for candy and your school supplies. As they get even older, you say it's candy, school supplies, and your clothes. So they learn to manage money. But if you tie it to doing their chores, now you're bribing them again. Do you see? You don't ever change their allowance because of their behavior. That's just what they live on. Their behavior is met with natural consequences. Do you see? Like the kid who didn't eat his food at the dinner table. You don't say, okay, now I'm going to take your allowance. Does anybody see the natural relationship between eating and allowance? I don't see it. And if I don't see it, how do you expect a kid to see it? A kid couldn't possibly see it. He's going to go, what? And feel punished. So no, you just give them their allowance. They get it, period. And the limitation of their behavior is based on their behavior. My healing is this is another writer, my healing is impacting everybody around me without design on my part. That's a critical phrase. You'd really know that real love is working when you're not working at it working. When somebody says, I was trying to love him, then you weren't loving him. Because real love is given unconditionally and it just flows effortlessly. And then when people say to me, so how do I know that real love is really changing me? You feel more peaceful. You start seeing changes that you never thought about. You start seeing responses from people that you didn't try to get. That's how you know real love is changing your life, just like this person says. It's just happening. I keep making calls, I keep reading, I have a coach, I'm letting go of the results, and the results are just amazing, aren't they? It's to hoot. Here's a lady who says, my kids have been seeing me as more calm. The biggest changes are being seen for my 16-year-old. Now see, this is huge. This is one of those changes that I was talking about. How do you tell if real love is changing your life? By what this lady writes. She says, my 16-year-old used to avoid me. And parents write me all the time, how come my kids avoid me? Well, this isn't hard. Why do people not stick their feet in fire ant beds? Because it's unpleasant. Why do we put our hands in fires? Because it hurts. Our kids avoid us because we are unpleasant. No child avoids a parent who's unconditionally loving. Hello? And so she writes, she used to avoid me, but then just the other day, she came to me to talk about her school life. Now, That's a miracle. That's just so cool. It brings tears to your eyes. Here's a girl who is sensing that her mother is becoming more loving, and she just comes to sit down by her and talk to her. That's as good as it gets, baby. Write that down, remember it, be thrilled for it. And don't make a big deal of it with your daughter. Because if you make a big deal of it with your daughter, as soon as you tell your daughter, oh, thanks for doing that, then the daughter's now going to feel obligated to do it the next time. So be grateful for it, make a big deal of it here, but don't do it with her. Here's a man who says, Greg, I cannot believe how much I insert words to manipulate my conversation with others. You're a brave man. Thank you for enabling me to see the expectations that I set for others. See, that's very cool. And then he goes on to say, I cannot just speak, so I'm concerned about changing the way I speak using real love. All your life you've been trained to manipulate people. It wasn't your fault. You were taught to do it. So it would be just like if all of your life you've been trained to speak English, then you go to a foreign country, and I said, okay, that's it, no more English. You think you would never stumble and speak English? Of course you would, because it's just your native language. It's what you do naturally. You naturally manipulate people. So don't go killing yourself when you make that mistake. The idea is just to identify it. Now here's the advantage of having a real love coach, for example, or at least having wise men and women that you can call often. When you manipulate people, it's huge that you be able to talk to these people, to talk to these wise men and women and say, look, here's what I did. Would you help me see what a non-manipulative sentence or question would have looked like? And they'll give you half a dozen ways you could do it. The more we see it, admit it, talk about it, feel loved while we're talking about it, our desire to manipulate people will just go, it'll vanish. I'm not kidding. So don't worry so much about your mistakes and the details. The more loved you feel, the less need you'll have to manipulate people, and you simply will manipulate them less. It's a guarantee. So don't worry so much about the individual circumstances. So here's the mother saying, so let's say we got this little kid who's talking about chocolate, you know, screaming, and when the whining and the moaning escalates into a rage, and the child refuses to leave the room, what do you do then? So let's say that the child is, I've done this with other people's kids. I had a child who came to my office and was screaming and on the floor and kicking, and I laid down on the floor and I looked into the child's face and I said, what do you want? And he was asking for something like chocolate, and I said, and he just kept screaming, and I said, we can't understand you when you do this. This isn't English. I don't understand. And then I mimicked the screaming for 2 seconds. I don't understand. But if you were to tell me in English, then I might be able to understand. And we need you to leave the room because we can't hear when you're doing that. He laid there on the floor and didn't move. Now, I could pick him up and move him to another room. I mean, I could pick up almost anybody. But now what would I be teaching him? All I'd be teaching him is, I'm bigger than you, so I can force you to do what I want. You're not going to win from that. Oh, I'll get him out of the room, but I'm not going to teach him a good principle. So what do? I said, oh, no problem. I know. Why don't you take this room? But we're going to go into the other room and talk. So we moved into the other room and we continued our conversation. After a little while, this child came in and started screaming again. Again, I got down on the floor. I did the same thing. He wouldn't move. We moved into another room. We only had to do that, I think, twice. And the child realized that his screaming bothered me none. I said, you can scream all day long, but A, you will not get the chocolate, and you will not be interrupting our conversation. So as soon as you're ready to speak to me like a human being, then I will listen to you and we'll discuss some alternatives. You might, for example, be able to have a quarter of a banana instead of chocolate or something. But I'll be glad to talk to you as soon as you're ready. And after moving a couple of times, this kid came in and, I want a banana. They only act like victims when they're getting something from it. And so we have to stop responding to them like we're hostages. That's what we do. When people come to us all intent and we step right onto the field of death with them. We feel like we're hostages. It's just because somebody else invites you to a conflict, you don't have to attend. We think we do. Somebody says some terrible, hateful thing to us, we think, oh, I have to respond. No, you don't. Fun, huh? So this mother says, I'm cooking dinner when this happens. It's a bit difficult to move the oven. Okay, in that case, you're right. You can't move the oven. And so what you do is leave the child there. Just leave the child there kicking and screaming or whatever it is. And you just say nothing. You just go cooking and keep doing whatever you're doing. And you pay no attention to the screaming and the kicking. Now, to be sure that the child is getting the point, perhaps every couple of minutes, you might say to the child, really looking forward to talking to you about this, but so far, I still can't understand you. And then you go right back to doing what you're doing. Because it's still important that the child feels loved. Get it? Always love and teach. Love and teach. It can't be just teaching. So if you just flat out ignore the kid completely, some children will feel unloved. So speak to them every once in a while, every 2 or 3 minutes. But you make it plain that the screaming, this is useless. And then later on, when the tantrum's all over, you might sit down and have a talk about screaming. You might say, have you ever heard me throw a tantrum and scream and fuss and kick at you when I'm talking to you? No. There's a reason for that. No one understands you when you do that. That's all. Jill says, an additional question about my husband. Will understanding more about what he went through with his childhood help me to love him better? How important is this to real love? The cool thing about real love is that it's not all that important to understand people's past. I've sat with people who have been to therapists for decades, and in 10 minutes, I've had people say to me, wow, I feel like you understand me better than all of them combined. Why? Not because I know their past, but because I know what they need. All they've needed all that time was for somebody to love them, to care about them, for them to matter. The details just ain't all that important, are they? For example, let's say that all your life you've never had enough to eat. You're starving to death, and that from day to day you didn't get food here and you didn't get food there, and this person didn't share beef with you and this person didn't share bread, and on Thursday you didn't get enough soup, so when you come to me hungry, do I need to know all that? Does it really matter to me all the times that you didn't get fed and what you didn't get? What really matters? That I feed you, doesn't it? And if I feed you sufficiently, are you even going to care about your past? No. Really, I treat people very little differently, whether they are alcoholics, drug addicts, been sexually abused, been beaten, ignored, stuffed in a closet. All the issues really do boil down to I didn't feel loved. And when we get that, going over the past, I'll go over it a little bit, because some people are dying to tell you about their past. And when they're just dying to tell you, you got to listen some, or they feel like you don't care about them. And so I'll say, well, sure, let's go into it. Your father sexually abused you, your mother abandoned you, your mother's an alcoholic, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And in every one of those acts, the message you heard was, I don't care about you. But isn't that about all that we really need to know? Because all the little details are just going to repeat that message over and over again. So with your husband, no, just love him. And at some point, you might say to him, maybe preferably face-to-face, but you might be able to do it on the phone. you know, who loved you as a child? What was it like for you? And if he wants to tell you, and if he feels loved by you, he will. And if he doesn't, it's not going to matter very much. Here's one lady who says, I have noticed that the I can be a better victim than you competitions that go on in our home are getting less frequent. Everybody needs to read the victim book because victims really do compete. Usually victims tend to gravitate toward people who are not quite as victim-y because they like to be on center stage. But it's fairly unavoidable that in some cases victims are with other victims, and then, oh boy, somebody's got to be the biggest victim, you know. And you'll see contests like this. I've actually sat in rooms, in real love groups sometimes even, where you see the contest, and sometimes it's all you can do to keep from just falling on the floor laughing, because here are these people who say, this happened to me today, and then somebody will say, I had something like that happen to me, but it was a little worse. And then somebody will say, oh, that was nothing. It was much worse for me. And in the end, who cares? We didn't feel loved, and you know, all we really need is the compassion of other people. So you could do that victim stuff forever. Now, it does seem gratifying at the time, because if you're the worst victim, everybody in the room is giving you that, oh, poor you look. But boy, it sure doesn't work. Here's a man who said, thanks for the idea of handing off my observed manipulating conversations to my coach to have him give me an alternative. Actually, he's already given me some examples from his life. Yeah, in fact, anytime during a day that you feel manipulative or uncomfortable, anything, I recommend to everybody who's involved in real love that they carry at the very least a 3x5 card with them. Why? Because on that card, you write down any moments of tension, stress, anxiety, anger, irritation, fear, where you feel like you're anything. Because if you'll write them down, you'll learn 3 times as much when you then sit down with a wise person or in a real love group or with a coach. Because when you say something, you've probably noticed in these questions here, that like when somebody says to me, what do I do with a child who's victim-y? Well, general questions like that are really hard to answer. Whereas you'll learn much more when you see the general principles of real love applied to a specific example. You get to see how they really work. Whereas if I say, well, you know, in general, this, we're having an intellectual discussion. Whereas when somebody comes to me and they say, the dog bit my foot, what should I do? Oh, well, do this. Gosh, that's helpful. You can really see what's going on. So write your stuff down. You'll learn twice as much if you do that. So I want to thank you all for being here. It's just been a hoot. And recommend that we had a lot more people who came here tonight. And so I look forward to talking to you. If you didn't get all of your questions answered, bring them with you next time. And look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. Bring your friends. We'll have more fun. In the meantime, remember, it's always about real love, and we love you.